Helicopters Magazine, your source for Canadian industry news and business intelligence for more than 30 years.
One of the most challenging issues facing operators in the helicopter industry is working with Transport Canada on a variety of issues, the implementation of safety management systems being just one. We asked our esteemed panel what their greatest challenges are when dealing with Transport Canada and what solutions may be at hand to improve the overall processes.
All operators have relations with Transport Canada to one extent or another, and depending often on personalities, they can be either constructive or otherwise. One of the largest issues that we continually have with Transport Canada is the disparity in regional interpretation of regulations. And it is beyond my comprehension how Ottawa continues to allow this to be the case. The fact that, I mean, we operate principally in two regions, Prairie and Northern out of Edmonton and Pacific out of Vancouver here. And to have the regulations interpreted differently by two regions and one company have to deal with those different it's ridiculous.
We feel our pain. We operate in 6 regions.
I know, Walt.
And it's tremendously frustrating.
Yeah.
And certainly, I think a large element of the frustration is that the cars have been around since 1996. They've been interpreted a certain way, and there seems in the last 2 years that some of the interpretations have changed, and the language hasn't changed, but the interpretations have changed, and there are times we feel like the interpretation changes has changed on a whim. There's no real logic to the change in the interpretation. So, I mean, that just doesn't seem fair to the operators that this happens. Okay, if it happens at the national level and comes down, we might be able to accept that. But because it's happening at the regional level, it's extremely frustrating. And as a pan-Canadian company, the VP Ops for Canadian, he's engaged far too much of his time in dealing with the regulatory issues. We want to be compliant with the law. We want to be compliant with the regulations, but we absolutely will be compliant with aviation safety. So if we get into a discussion with transport, our default is going to be, are we safely operating the aircraft? Are we operating within the terms of the law? Can we justify, defend our position? Okay, if we can answer yes to all that, well, then we'll continue the battle with transport. But there's a lot of really good people at transport. I just don't think they've been given the resources to do what they need to do to support the industry. And that's something that also should be addressed at the highest level, at the Director General's level, because if you have too much on your plate, then remove some of the stuff off your plate so that the stuff you're doing is being done properly. And I think transport has way too many projects on the go right now for the staffing and resource level they have. Mm-hmm. And that's hurting. It's hurting the industry, and it's hurting transport's ability to be an effective regulator.
Regional disparity issue is one that's particularly sensitive to me because in many ways the association is a bit of a lightning rod for those issues. When we hear from individual members problems about interpretation in one region and discover that it's being interpreted differently in a couple of other regions, that creates some problems. Now, on some of the issues that have arisen so far, we've been able to work with Transport Canada and resolve them, but they still tend to be a huge and costly distraction for industry and for the association from other more important issues, quite frankly, and they seem to be being dealt with on a tactical basis by the department. When there's a problem arises, they're trying to fix it rather than having a system that ensures that all of the regions are interpreting it in an identical way. I mean, we are an area of federal jurisdiction, and there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to cross regions and have the same interpretation apply. So that's one problem. The other is in terms of the level of service from Transport Canada. I think it would be a fair statement to say that Transport Canada has retreated in some ways from the SMS principles that were articulated a few years ago. And there's a number of things that have sort of led me to that conclusion, and they are things like the repatriation of the CBAA program, for example, a very clear message to industry that there'll be less delegation going forward, at least in terms of a regulatory stewardship program, but in many other areas as well. So in a time when more and more responsibility is being shifted to industry to manage their own safety and mitigate risks in their own operations, we have a situation where less and less responsibility or less and less authority is being given to operators to actually accomplish that in a flexible way. And we're still dealing with very prescriptive regulations. I don't see any other way but to become more engaged with industry through the association, and to look to industry to help develop the safety standards. Some of that is going on, and I don't want to be negative because there are a number of projects. NVIS is one that Bob has been involved in, where transport has engaged with us, and it's a very promising example of how the system can work. But I think the short answer is that the only way out of this, and to leave something on the table for operators in the way of efficiency gains, is to capitalize on the experience in our industry. You know, when faced with a declining level of experience inside the department, is to turn to the people who are in the business and draw upon that experience to help develop the standards and the regulations that will help guide our conduct and help mold our regulatory environment in the years going forward. I don't see any other way around it. They just don't have the horsepower any longer to do it all themselves, or the expertise, to be blunt.
Not all bad news.
Yeah.
There are some bright spots.
That's exactly it.
One of them is the INVIS project. It's almost, I think, a bit accidental that we have the good fortune of having Stefan Demers, who's been dedicated to this task. Alex Roberts now has had funding to travel a couple times, including to Europe, to join the ICAO HEMS working group. So that was outstanding. I was very surprised that he actually received that approval. So it certainly isn't that we are still being supported, and Transport Canada inspectors are still trying to do their best to be engaged. But I also really have to echo both what Walter said and Fred, is that these are hard times in terms of our developing that partnership. So the vision, I think, that we all had a few years ago, especially with the CBA precedent dealing with the 604 operators, was that we were sort of launching ourselves into a new age of full partnership between an association like the HAC and Transport Canada, and we'd be moving forward together to develop solutions. And my fear right now is that we really don't have, in general, except for these exceptions, we don't really have that partner anymore. I feel like when we're sitting down at the table across from Transport Canada, that the chair is empty. And this hollowing out of government didn't start with this government, so I'm not picking sides in this fight. We started this under the Liberals, under Chrétien, but it's certainly been fully embraced, and the present Conservative government has run with it. So every year there's been a reduction in a budget at Transport Canada, and that may make sense in this era of small government philosophy, but it's not working for us as an industry. We can't innovate anymore. We're falling behind the international market. So operators and that doesn't apply to STARS right now, so it's not our problem. But when I talk to people like Cougar, and if you look at CHC, I mean, CHC is hardly engaged in the association anymore or in Canadian regulatory matters. Why? Because they can't afford to be. They have to now keep up to the international market, and the Canadian market, the Canadian regulatory environment is becoming more and more irrelevant to those operators. We used to be innovators. Canada has a reputation for leading the helicopter industry, and I'm not getting that sense anymore when I'm on the international stage. I'm kind of sort of shuffling my feet, and it's hard to look people in the eye anymore on the international stage when I'm talking about what we're doing in Canada to innovate and keep pace with the rest of the industry. So So yeah, what can we do? I think we need to pick up the phone and talk to our candidates and get the message out to this government and whoever's going to form the next government that you have to stop it. You have to turn this around, in fact, and allocate more resources so that we can be a strong industry again.
We have a good rapport and relationship with the Ontario-based Transport Canada.
Okay.
We don't, we have a good ongoing relation with them. Anything that comes up, we have always seem to be able to resolve whatever needs to be done. And so I hear that a lot of these topics come up and such with regard to staffing and such, but it hasn't really affected us in a big way at all.